What's up everyone, Maki here with Design View. Today we're going to be talking about why G2A and other key resellers are bad. And if you're wondering if they're bad, yes, they are bad. So real quick, let's go ahead and say, what is a reseller or a marketplace for reselling keys? Now, they're basically like G2A, and there's other ones as well. I don't know of a lot of them, and I don't know how to pronounce the other one that I know, so I'm just going to say G2A. And I just want to point out, yes, there are other ones. G2A is not alone in this. However, they are the kind of one that sprouts out everything, and they're like, hey, by the way, we're here, and they try and tell everyone that they exist, and so most people know about G2A. And the problem comes into play because most people don't really understand how this market works, or what they actually are, or what they do. So basically, a key market reselling site is basically a place to where anybody can put up a digital game key for sale, and you can set it at any cost that you want. So it's kind of like using eBay for digital games, but at the same time, it's not, because it doesn't actually have a physical product, and there's no way to actually verify whether a key is real without actually either contacting the marketplace in which they were sold, such as Steam or something like that, which Steam isn't necessarily going to want to work with G2A, I don't think. And they're not going to work with every single reseller, which means that they end up being kind of fishy in the first place. And there's also the fact that you can end up just redeeming the key to actually check if it works or not. And that's really the only other way you can end up doing that. And the other problem with this is that they've tried to, especially G2A, has kind of talked about it being like used games, to where it's like, oh, well, people are allowed to resell used games, right? And for one, selling used games isn't necessarily good for the industry, and that's a topic for another video. But at the same time, it's not, because the key that you buy and actually use isn't resellable. Instead, it's a key that you actually purchased either specifically to resell, or you bought it. Let's say there are legitimate reasons you could actually have two keys. Let's say you bought a key for a friend or something like that, and the friend ends up already having the game or something. So yes, there are legitimate ways to get two keys. However, the case is you're actually not selling a used product. You are reselling a new product without the precautions of going to the developer for that second resale, which is okay, I guess, in some cases. Let's say somebody got that double key like I was talking about, that's fine. And I think that idea is actually really, really cool. However, overall, it ends up not being necessarily a good thing, and the way the market actually works is quite malicious. Now, the reason for this is actually the fact that most keys that are sold on these sites are not actually legitimate keys. And I'm not saying legitimate as in they don't work, many of them do. However, there is a chance that, one, they can end up not working at all, like I was just stating, or number two, they were gained in malicious ways, such as aka buying it in a really, really cheap bundle and kind of reselling it at a higher price, which that's technically market trading, and buying it game on sale. Let's say the game is 50% off on Steam, and then they can end up reselling it later for like 80% or something like that of the cost. Then that's technically just market trading, which isn't necessarily illegal, although it is kind of scummy and I don't necessarily like it. And I think it is sort of harming to the industry. And then there's also the case to where people end up buying bundles from like Humble Bundle or something like that. But they buy them in masses and then end up reselling the keys over time for like a small sort of profit. So they'll end up reselling it from like $1 and they end up selling it for $2, which is not necessarily a good thing to do. And that is actually denying sales as well. It's kind of the argument for piracy, or against piracy as well, to where developers are kind of like, hey, we're losing money on this. And that's the entire reason why this is actually bad for developers. They end up losing money. Now, there's also even worse cases to where this ends up actually being worse than piracy. And this is why I recommend always avoiding these reselling sites. And this is because there's things like, let's say, fraudulent charges. So let's say they end up stealing a credit card or something like that, and then they can end up buying a bunch of products to sell on G2A and sort of make a roundabout way to kind of earn money off of the stolen credit card. And then that credit card user is like, hey, my credit card got stolen, and then they have to get a chargeback. The developer is the one that actually has to pay for that. And you'd think, oh, well, they just have to give the money back, right? Well, the thing is, banks have to charge a recast fee, or a kind of reimbursement fee, or whatever the hell they call it, a chargeback essentially. And that actually ends up costing the developer money, because they have to pay back like the $50 or whatever it costs for the game, plus a little bit more. And like, let's say, for example, on PayPal, if you get a chargeback on PayPal, it costs you $20, no matter the cost. So somebody can end up charging back $1, and then it could end up costing you $21, which is ridiculous in a lot of cases. And that kind of goes down to the banks and everything like that for charging the developer and not charging the person who actually stole it. But here's another precaution thing that ends up happening. These key reselling sites don't actually have any verification to end up kind of harming them in the long run. So it would be like, oh, well, you're reselling keys. Okay, well, that's bad. Don't do it. Cool, what are they going to do? It's not something that can actually be kind of brought to court. At least it can, but it would actually have to be on an individual case, and that would end up costing a ton of money, which means that doing that would actually be not necessarily something you'd want to do. Now let's go ahead and switch over to my drawing board here, because I kind of want to explain the market. And so I was talking about how there are legitimate uses, and let's say somebody ends up getting 2 different keys. Oops, I got to make a new layer here. Sorry, I screwed up my artboard. Anyways, so you end up having these originator peoples that end up actually buying it. Actually, let's call them L. So we'll have L as our legitimate buyers. And so they'll end up buying a game for $50 or $58, whatever. I can't spell today. So they'll end up buying a game for $50, and that is a legitimate sale. And then they'll end up wanting to resell it for, let's say, I don't know, they want to get as much money back, so they end up trying to resell it for $48. And this is the sort of case that is perfectly fine, in my opinion, because the developer ended up getting their cut from this $50 already. However, there's cases to where they end up not getting these maliciously, or they end up getting these not legitimately, and they end up getting them maliciously as well. Now, the legitimate users is fine. However, when they try to sell that key for $48, they're not actually going to be able to sell it. That's not going to happen because on the chart, they're going to be one of the higher costs, while these people that are getting them illegitimately are going to be all the way down at like cheaper costs, or even cheaper in some cases. And then basically people are always going to buy the cheapest one because of the way the market works. They basically say, here's the cheapest one, you can buy that one. I mean, technically you can grab the higher ones. However, you don't know which ones are going to be legitimate or not, and there's no way to actually say. So let's call these ones malicious. So we'll call them M. Man, that's the first letter of my name. That's a bad idea. But anyway, so they have the malicious users, and then basically they're never going to sell this at $48, which means they have to drop the price down. Which means that basically this is going to be harmful for not only the developer, because the developer sees no money from these malicious acts, but they also end up getting a case where the legitimate users actually are harmed as well, because they're not going to be able to sell it for $48. Instead, they're going to have to take an even heavier loss and end up undercutting these guys for even low as $1 and be like, all right, well, now my legitimate user is losing $49 in this system that is supposed to help people who are legitimately using the system. And this is one of the major reasons why this is bad. And it's also a problem with the market as well. The cases to where somebody is a legitimate user is so rare. Let's say there's like a pie chart or something like that, and it would be such a small little tiny sliver, while everyone else would be a malicious user. Now, the way game sales normally work, just to kind of explain how this usually goes, is there's sort of 3 different sort of cost points that will end up being made. And one of those is kind of varying depending on how the developer works. And the cuts end up being through sort of whatever service they end up using. So let's say there's a developer cost, right? This is what they end up selling it to the official marketplaces like Steam for, or something like that. Normally it doesn't work this way. I think Steam does a percentage-based stuff. So it's like 70% or something like that. It's like 70, 75. I don't know. It's a ridiculous cut. Anyways, they end up taking a certain amount of cut. But let's just say, for the kind of sake of simplicity, let's say the developer, which we're going to call D, has it for, let's say, $5 to make it simple. Now, something like Steam, let's call this the originator, and they will end up selling it for $7. And so they'll get a profit of $2 here, and then the developer kind of gets a profit of $5. And that seems pretty simple, right? And that's normally how it works. So you can end up buying this, and you can be like, all right, well, what if I just bought directly from the developer, which some developers do allow you to do through services like PayPal or their own website, which means that you can end up getting it cheaper through the developer. Normally, they don't do this because normally they try and sell it at one consistent cost. So it would be like $9.99 or something like that. And they're going to keep that consistent because that's the amount of money they wish they got. And then they just kind of consider stuff like the originator a just sort of cut cost as well. They'd be like, all right, well, you know what? We're just going to take that hit. It's perfectly fine. And so they actually have to sell more through those resellers, but those, well, not resellers, but originators. But those originators are actually how they end up selling so many copies, because they actually advertise their product because they want people to spend money because they end up getting a profit. Now, the problem comes into play when you actually have this lower point. Now, this lower point I'm going to call S for sale. Now, a developer can end up selling their cost for, or their product for any sort of cost that they want. And certain cases, they'll end up undercutting themselves quite a bit. So let's say it ends up being 50% off. So it's $2.50. And let's say the originator has actually been in this sort of deal as well. So they'll end up being like, all right, you know what? We're only going to take a 50-cent cut. That's super generous, by the way. And then the developer ends up getting this $2. Now, the problem with this is that a malicious user will end up buying this product at $2. or $2.50. So they'll end up costing them $2.50. And then they'll resell the game at $5. And now you're thinking, oh, well, that's just going to be the same cost as the developer thing, except the developer is not getting $2.50 of this. Or actually, it's not even getting $3 of it because the originator was getting 50 cents to begin with, which means that basically the developer got $2 instead of $5, which means basically they lost, $3. And so this is actually how it ends up harming developers in the long run. It also ends up promoting things like selling them from getting malicious purchases as well. And let's say it ended up being a chargeback. Let's say there was an extra chargeback to where it was like, oh, well, this is also going to cost you $20 or something like that to end up recharging this cost that would have ended up being $2. And then you ended up having $23 that they ended up losing overall. And it's like, all right, well, that's actually quite a ridiculous amount. And you think that that wouldn't happen, but it actually happens a lot more than people end up realizing. Now, there's sources out there that kind of already talk about how G2A and everything like that are already bad, and you can end up looking up that stuff. But to understand it, this is kind of why it ends up being not a good thing in general, and why it ends up kind of being flawed in its own right. And as I was saying, it ends up adding kind of incentive. If somebody can get a key for cheap and then resell it for more, let's say they end up buying it for $3 and they can be like, yeah, I can make a profit of $5 and sell it for $7, just like the reseller or originator or whatever. It ends up incentive to end up doing this sort of thing. So like, let's say people buying Humble Bundles, they buy a bunch of keys. Let's say they buy 100 bundles, right? This is kind of ridiculous, but I wouldn't doubt it. They get 100 keys and for $1, and then they end up selling them for like $2, right? They just made $100 profit. And so basically it sounds like a sort of scummy way to do everything. And some people would argue that it's legitimized, which people do. But at the same time, that's $100, or rather somewhat around 80 or something like that the developer isn't getting. And that is not an insignificant amount of money, especially when you look at G2A, who sells millions of copies of games. And this ends up cutting the costs the developers end up getting so heavily in a lot of cases that sometimes it would actually be better just to pirate a title instead of actually purchasing it from a reseller. So if you're looking at resellers, not that I'm going to promote piracy, that's a stupid thing to do, but what I'm saying is that you should buy it from an originator or from the developer themselves. So like, let's say they have PayPal on their website, go to that PayPal. If you want the game cheaper, go to that PayPal. Wait for a sale. Wait for a Steam sale. Steam has ridiculous sales all the time. Steam will end up having a game for $5 when it's already at the market for $60 all the time. Let's say Far Cry 3, for example. Far Cry 3 was originally $40, and I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm going to wait on it. Went on sale 2 weeks later. It was $5. I bought it for $5. You know what? That's supporting the developer, and it was on sale, and it promoted other people to buy that product as well because it boosts sales numbers, and it adds up adding into that whole thing. And that is something the developer was like, hey, I wouldn't have bought in that game at the $40 cost point. However, going back into it, I was like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and purchase it because it's on sale. And that isn't a lost sale, to whereas somebody buying something on G2A is a lost sale and not something they can necessarily account for. It can end up being something as simple as just a legitimate reseller as well. But at the same time, that's not going to be somebody that's actually purchasing the game and adding to those numbers as well. Let's say somebody that's like let's say a big company, right? Ubisoft or EA or something like that. A company that is actually, selling public trades and everything like that. This could end up being a case to where they end up denying them not only the sales and the figures, but they're also denying them numbers. Numbers is extremely important in big business. Those bigger numbers you have, the bigger of a company you are. And yes, it's kind of dumb, I know, but that's the way it works. And so they'll end up having their whole stockholders and everything like that. It's like, well, we sold 5 million copies. And it's like, all right, awesome. That's an amazing number. However, that number could have been like 7 million or something like that, depending on, how many people actually bought it through like a reseller or something like that. It's so ingrained in the way the actual markets work, and it's so complicated into why it's actually bad in a lot of senses. But in the general sense, hopefully I've been able to kind of describe why in a sort of nutshell it is bad. And it isn't necessarily something anybody should participate in. And I will admit it is very, very tempting to go to G2A or something like that and buy a game for cheap. I'm not a person who's generally financially stable, I'll be 100% honest. I'm normally somebody who struggles with having extra funds to end up spending on games. And so it's very, very tempting to look at something like G2A, and I imagine it is for a lot of other people. It's like, why not save money? Whereas really, you should just wait for a sale. Wait for something to be like, hey, you know what? I want to buy this game for some other sort of cost. just wait for a sale. Because otherwise, you run the risk of having the developer getting no support whatsoever. And if you actually like these games, if you actually like the gaming industry, you should be supporting the developers in any way that you possibly can. Even if you're not helping them that much, buying things like Humble Bundle for $1 isn't bad. You're still supporting people and you're supporting charity as well, which is actually pretty cool. $1 is not really significant in a lot of ways, but at the same time, for these charities, $1 could end up being the difference between them having funding and them not having funding. And regardless, it's giving money to charity as well. So if you're looking for games cheap, just look at those sort of cases. Buy games in bundles, buy things in ways that are actually going to help the developer and maybe the originators as well, that actually help these things actually get sold instead of actually buying through these resellers. And the sort of same argument can be made for used games and stuff like that, but I'm going to leave that as a topic for another video. So hopefully I've ended up kind of making a decent argument for this. This is kind of like one of those things where it probably sounds like I'm preaching a lot, to where I'm just like, hey, don't do this, but realistically it's something I'm talking about because I care about the gaming industry, and I feel like it's something that has been a major problem. And companies like G2A have been immature sprouts about the entire thing as well. There was recently, the thing that actually just kind of sparked this discussion inside of me, is that GDC, aka the Game Developers Conference, they had one of their representatives go up on stage and try and kind of go around the accusations by targeting another developer, or targeting a developer. And that goes into drama and stuff like that. Basically, he's all like, oh, well, their accusations were false, yada, yada. It just started kind of raging on stage until somebody actually had to cut him off and be like, hey, no, dude. And the developer was really cool about it. They're like, hey, do you really want to go through this on GDC? This is stupid. And so these companies do so many scummy things, and I don't understand why anybody trusts them. I see a lot of people defending them, and I don't think that they have anything that's really defendable. And as I said, I think the idea of selling extra keys isn't a bad one. However, we should see something like, let's say, Steam do away with it or something like that, or end up trading through your friends. I give games away to my friends all the time. When I end up having an extra key, they do the same for me. Some friends even buy me games outright, which is actually kind of cool. That's how I actually ended up playing Overwatch for the first time. But, you know, look at things like that. Maybe look at a friend that will end up cutting some of the costs for you or something like that. It's just, buying a game cheaper isn't necessarily worth the overall cost. And while you could say, oh, well, I'm just a drop in a puddle, that puddle only exists because there's so many drops. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. You can also end up checking out my other sorts of content. The game in the background has been Megadimension Neptunia V2, which is a game I did a review on. I want to apologize if the video is a little bit stuttery. This game has problems running in borderless, and in order to actually do this whole little switch thing, that's so pleasing. In order to do that, which allows me to actually put my elbow into my face because I just have my keyboard in a weird spot. In order to do that, I have to run in borderless mode, and it has a problem on my machine running in borderless. I talk about that in my review if you're interested. But yeah, I did an impressions review, so impressions reviews are one series you can end up doing. I also did an impressions review for Ori and the Blind Forest, which is an amazing game that some people pirated, which is not cool. And I don't agree with that at all. But at the same time, it is a really, really good game. It is absolutely incredible. And buy it through Steam or through the developer site, not through G2A, please and thank you. And basically, yeah, that's a thing I did. So yeah, this is also a new series that I'm kind of starting up called Design View, where I talk more about the industry and kind of go a little bit more in depth than I normally would and try and do this whole little kind of artboard thing. I don't necessarily know if people are going to like that or not, so please leave me a comment on whether you think that's a good idea or not, like this little thing here. I don't know why, but I like it. I like making little faces on it as well. But yeah, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as I said earlier, and I will see you guys in the next video. I made a cat. It's gonna have teeth. That's the worst cat I've ever drawn in my life.